In this video, I'll show you how to flash MeshCore onto a Heltec V4 and set it up as a repeater. This video is focused on flashing the device and doing the basic repeater setup. The full repeater hardware build will be a separate video. By the end, you should have a board running MeshCore repeater firmware and be ready to start testing it on your own mesh. Before you plug the board in, make sure the antenna is connected. That is a good habit with LoRa boards because you don't want the radio transmitting without an antenna attached. Also make sure you're using a proper USB data cable. Some USB cables are charge only, and if you use one of those, the board may power on but the computer won't detect it. If the flasher doesn't see your board later, try a different cable before assuming something is wrong with the board. You'll also want to use a browser that supports web serial, such as Chrome or Edge. MeshCore devices can run different firmware depending on what you want the board to do. Because we're setting the board up as a repeater, you want to choose the repeater firmware. A companion device is normally used with a phone or computer. A repeater is meant to sit somewhere fixed and help pass messages across the mesh. So when you're using the flasher, make sure you select the correct board and the repeater firmware. Don't just pick the closest looking board name. The board target matters because the pin mapping, radio setup, and display setup can be different between devices. For the Heltec V4, connect the antenna first, then plug the board into your computer with USB. Open the MeshCore flasher in Chrome or Edge. Select the Heltec V4 as the board. Then select the repeater firmware. Before flashing, double check that both of those are correct. You want the correct hardware target and the correct firmware role. If either of those is wrong, the board may still flash, but it may not behave the way you expect. Next, put the Heltec V4 into flashing mode. Usually this is done by holding the boot button, tapping reset, and then releasing the boot button. If the board doesn't show up the first time, try the button sequence again. The timing can be a little bit fussy. Once the board appears in the flasher, erase the existing flash first. Then flash the repeater firmware. Wait for the process to finish before unplugging the board. If the board does not appear in the flasher, start with the simple checks. Try another USB cable, try another USB port, make sure the browser has permission to access the serial device, make sure you're using Chrome or Edge, then put the board back into flashing mode and try again. Most of the time, flashing issues come down to the cable, the port, browser permissions, or the board not quite being in the right mode. Once the firmware has been flashed, the board should reboot. At this point, the board has the repeater firmware installed, but it still needs to be configured. This is important. A freshly flashed repeater is not automatically ready for your region or your local mesh. You still need to check the radio settings. That includes things like frequency, bandwidth, spreading factor, and coding rate. These settings need to match the rest of the MeshCore network you want to use. If they don't match, the board can be working correctly, but still not communicate with the rest of your mesh. Use the correct frequency and radio settings for your country or region, and make sure they match your own network or local MeshCore community. After the repeater has been flashed, you can go into the configuration section and set up the repeater. You can usually access the configuration straight after flashing, or you can go back to the main flasher page and enter the configuration tool from there. Sometimes I find the board doesn't connect to the configuration page straight away. If that happens, give it a couple of seconds first. If it still doesn't connect, press reset on the board and try again. That usually fixes it for me. Once you're connected, give the repeater a clear name. Keep it simple and easy to recognize. Some people use the suburb, area, or general location where the repeater is installed. Others might use names like home repeater, shed repeater, or Heltec V4 repeater. The main thing is to use a name that will still make sense later, especially if you end up running more than one repeater. Next, set or change the admin password. Don't leave it on the default if the repeater is going to be installed somewhere long-term, shared, or hard to access. Then check the radio settings. Make sure the frequency and LoRa settings match the network you want this repeater to work with. After that, save the settings and reboot the board. After the board reboots, reconnect to it and check the basic details. Confirm the name, confirm the role as repeater, confirm the radio settings. If you already have another MeshCore device set up, check whether it can see the repeater. The important thing is not just that the board powers on. You want to confirm that it is running the repeater firmware and that the settings match your mesh. Once that looks right, the board is ready for basic testing. If the repeater has the wrong time, discovery and adverts may not behave the way you expect. So if the flash worked, but the repeater is not showing up properly, check the clock as well. Depending on your setup, you may be able to set the time through USB serial or from an admin device. This is one of those things that can make the repeater look broken when it may just need the correct time. The Seeed Studio XIAO NRF52840 is a bit different. With the Heltec V4, you usually use the boot and reset buttons to get into flashing mode. With the XIAO, the flasher can put the board into DFU mode for you. To flash this board, connect it to your computer and select the correct target in the flasher. Then select the repeater firmware. Instead of using the same boot and reset button process, use the Enter DFU mode option in the flasher. The board should reconnect in DFU mode. Once it is in DFU mode, continue with the flashing process. For NRF52 based boards, check the current MeshCore notes for your exact board before installing the repeater somewhere hard to access. Some NRF52 boards have bootloader related notes, especially around over-the-air updates and recovery. That is worth checking before you put the device somewhere inconvenient, like up high or outside in an enclosure. This same flashing process is also one way to update the repeater later. If you want to update the firmware, you can connect the board back to your computer, open the MeshCore flasher, select the correct board and firmware role again, and flash the newer firmware version. Depending on your board and setup, you may also be able to update over Wi-Fi or BLE instead of plugging it in with USB. I'd still check the current MeshCore notes for your specific board before doing that, especially if the repeater is installed somewhere hard to access. And that's the repeater flashed and ready for testing. From here, the next step is making sure the radio settings match your local mesh, then testing where the repeater actually works best. In a future video, I'll go through the hardware side of the build, including power, enclosure, antenna setup, and placement.